I'm Darren Lehman. I've been with Student Life at the university for a little over 14 years. And Jim asked me today to come present a real-life project that we did and follow the DMAIC process. So as we go through this, and Jim talks about those different parts of DMAIC, I'm going to tell you how that correlated with the project that we actually did. So, there we go. So we call this mobile shop, and this is a tool cart. And our problem that we started out with a couple of years ago was that we had the opportunity to find some solutions. And Jim talked earlier about the voice of the customer. He talked about critical to quality. Well, in this case, our voice of the customer, our customer were our maintenance technicians working in the field doing it. That was our customer. And that's sometimes hard to grasp that we are our own customers, but they were the ones delivering the product that the students found in their residence hall when they came back. So we talked about the voice of the customer. The maintenance worker had to leave my room 3 times before he could fix my sink. Well, we got all the maintenance technicians together in a room and says, what is hindering you from getting your job done? And a lot of times I said, you know what, I don't always have the right part with me, and a lot of times I don't have the right tool with me. I got to go back and get the tool. I have to go back to the shop and get the part. So we listened to that. So we came up with some different solutions. Critical quality said the tools and parts were easily accessible and close to the worker or close to where they were doing the work. So if you see these starbursts down here, we see that, where's our, 62% of the jobs had to leave prior to completion to retrieve the tool, the part, or a ladder or some other to finish that job. We also spent about 16 minutes to perform a repair, which was higher than what we wanted depending on the repair.
So the next step in our DMAIC process is measure, and the purpose of measure is to determine our current performance and identify the areas with the biggest bang for the buck. Typical activities include evaluating the existing measurement system, observing the process, gathering data, and then developing that process map a little bit more in depth. So why do we measure? What's the point? It separates what we think is happening from what is really happening. And it confirms or disproves our preconceived notions. And it helps us to avoid solutions that don't really solve the real problem. And maybe most importantly, it removes the bias of individuals. It lets the data do the talking. So sometimes data exists and sometimes it doesn't. When it exists, we can go in and grab that data and analyze it. There are lots of tools to do that. Other times we have to go collect data. So your green belt or black belt, or possibly you after you go through yellow belt training, will be able to figure out what the right tool is based on the data you have and go collect more data if we need it. Just going to take a moment to talk about the concept of value-added work. And the reason it's important to talk about value-added work, can I see a show of hands? How many of you have things that you do in your workday on a fairly regular basis that you feel are useless or could be done better? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, those of you who didn't raise your hands, I want your job. Those of you who did raise your hands, those steps in the process, and actually all of you can pay attention to this, those steps in the process that add value in the eyes of the customer, they're essential to the production of the service that we provide, are called value-added steps. There are other steps in the process that are non-value-added. If the customer were given a choice, they couldn't care less about those steps. They wouldn't pay you to do those steps. They're steps that we do because somebody else told us to do them, or we've always done it that way, or whatever it is. Doesn't matter. The customer doesn't really care. The customer cares that they're getting their room cleaned. They don't care everything that led up to that. They just care about a clean room. So we look at these steps and we identify those that add value and those that don't. And then we try to remove those steps that don't add value from the process where it makes sense, but only where it makes sense. And then we calculate something called a value-added ratio. The value-added ratio is the value-added time over the total time. And in typical processes, the value-added time, believe it or not, is only somewhere from 5 to 20%, which means that 80 to 95% of the time or steps in a process don't really add value for the customer. We try to move as much as we can that value added from those low percentages to a higher percentage of about 20 to 40%. You're never going to be able to get rid of all the non-value added steps, but we move as much as we can in that direction.
So the part of the measurement phase that Jim talked about in our particular program, the belts, those conducting the study, walked around with our maintenance folks for several days. It was over about a 3-week period, both before and after they received the improvement. And what we found was 44% of our time was redeployable and non-value add. And again, nobody argues that a maintenance person doesn't have to go get the right tool to do the job. But the customer doesn't see that as value add. They, again, like Jim said, they just see that you're here, I want you to fix the problem. So our goal was to find a way to eliminate part of that time of them going to get that tool. So our measurement consisted of all the tasks they did, the time they spent doing it, and how many times they had to leave the job site for parts and or tools. So data is our friend when used correctly. So we collected this data, and the maintenance guys were right. They were spending a lot of time leaving the area to get the tools because they didn't have all the tools they needed, and that data showed that for us, and it brought that out. So when collected and analyzed, analyzed correctly, it helps us to make decisions. So we couldn't just sit back and say, oh, well, we got to buy you a bunch more tools. Here you go. Here's another tool budget. Go buy whatever you need. We had to analyze the data and find out to make the decisions before we went into the improve phase of DMAIC.
So that moves us into the analyze phase. Remember DMAIC, D-M-A, analyze. And the purpose of the analyze phase is to identify the root causes of the problem and confirm those root causes with data. And the typical activities of the analyze phase are looking for patterns in the data. Do Mondays look worse than Fridays? Use the analysis tools to get past the symptoms and get to the true root causes of the problem. And then target those places where there's a lot of waste, especially time. So there are lots of different data analysis tools. So let's say we want to show percentages or magnitude. So similar to Darren's pie chart that he just showed, typically we're using bar charts or pie charts. If we want to look at trends, like our travel to work time, we would use line graphs. So they're depending on the data and what we're trying to analyze. Again, variety of tools. You're going to learn about a lot of those tools in the yellow belt training.
So we analyzed all the data, all that time that they spent walking around with their maintenance techs. They collected every job they did, how long they took to do it, how many times they had to leave the job site. We found 61% of our time was redeployable, which means we could do more work and more jobs with that. So we identified that right there as every maintenance tech had about 61% of their day that we could do something else with to convert to value-added time. Which moves us into the improve phase. The purpose of the improve phase is to make changes in the process that will eliminate the defects, the waste, and that are linked to the customer needs, the customer desires that we identified in that first phase of define. And the typical activities here are using creativity exercises to identify the possible range of solutions, picking the best solution, reviewing best practices to see who else is addressing these same problems and how they're addressing those problems, and then piloting that chosen solution, and then put together the plan for the full-blown implementation. So during our improve phase, we brought out the mobile shop cart that we saw earlier, and we trained the staff on how to use it. And we didn't train them on how to use it. Everybody knows how to use the cart, but you had a place for everything on that cart, and everything was in its place. It had parts containers. It had a tool on it. They could easily take their inventory of what parts and tool they had before leaving the shop in the morning to go out into the residence hall rooms and go. So some of the things we found, first of all, the shop cart was much easier to push than what they had put together themselves. A lot of them had scavenged a cart here and there. I won't say a target sharpening cart because that doesn't exist, but they had some kind of cart that they had loaded up. So they were almost doing this. We just improved that process with a better tool. So the value time added checking on something went from 16% to 7%, and the value added time spent on fixing something went from 68 to 80%. We went from doing 5.5 jobs per room for one trip up to 10 jobs per room. And this is a turnover of the rooms after the students moved out. So while they were there in the room, they already had more tools than they needed and more parts, so they did 5 more jobs, which is a better product for the students when they arrived in the fall. Tasks per day, they went up from 37 to 49 to complete, and leaving for a tool dropped from 25% to 0%, as you can see here. The number of times they had to leave a job for something was at 1.24. After MS, which is mobile shop, went down to just half a time, or a drop of 60%.
Which moves us into the control phase. The purpose of the control phase is to make sure that any gains the team makes will last. And the typical activities in the control phase are documenting the new improved procedures, making sure everybody's trained adequately, and setting up procedures for tracking key vital signs, so that if these vital signs go goofy, then we know that something is not working the way it's supposed to.
So our control phase included taking the cart, making sure that it still had the correct parts and tools on, and we all know that buildings get renovated, things change. All of a sudden I needed this drawer handle, now I need this drawer handle. So part of our control is to make sure that that tool, that mobile shop, was still effective today and from residence hall to residence hall. So we checked the inventory of it. We changed out tools and parts on that cart depending on what job they were doing or what building they were going to. One of the best things of this project was one of the maintenance folks who participated as a team member in this and was tracked everything they did before and after the mobile shop, who pretty much said up front, there's nobody can tell me how to do my job because I already know it. I've done maintenance for 25 years. When it was all over and the program was over and we had to take the sample cart away from him, this was his quote: "I missed my cart, don't take it away." Well, we ordered many of these carts and he got one in about a couple of weeks. But he went from, "You can't tell me how to improve my job," to, "This is great. Now that we had the data, I got the tools that I needed to do my job. I've been telling you guys I didn't have the right tool. Data proved that he didn't have the right tools. He got the right tool and much more effective and much more happy employee."
Thanks,
Yes.
Darren.
How long were your sample selection? Like, how long were they implemented?
3 weeks of taking data before, and then we did 3 weeks afterward. Well, actually, there was a 2-week period in there of training with that tool, and then they came back and followed them for another 3 weeks in a very similar building. Now we have any new building we do, that's the tools we start out with. We start with the mobile shop cart, and that's the way we do business now.
So most projects that you'll be involved in will probably take someplace from 4 to 6 months. So they're scoped to be in that 4 to 6 month period. This was one of those projects that
We did it over a summer.
The scope was narrower and it was quicker implementation. But the typical, and that's why we liked it. That's why we wanted to show it, because it was a quick win. It was a good project. Everything went well. Lots of projects, you don't really know what the problem is. You don't really have an idea of what solutions there should be. And so they're typically going to take 4 to 6 months.
The great thing I liked about this was from our employees who said, "This is an issue I'm facing out there, help us solve it." A lot of times we look at that customer as, what are we delivering? But if we get the customer, the maintenance technician, taken care of first, the students coming back in the fall are taken care of tenfold because of that we started right with our employees and took care of them. So,
All right. So what have we learned? Well, most importantly, we learned how to do the hokey pokey. Thank you, Desiree. What else have we learned? We've learned the 4 keys to Lean Six Sigma are delighting our customers, improving our processes, working together in teams for maximum gain, and basing decisions on facts and data, not opinion or best guess. And then we learned about the DMAIC model and how it ensures that our projects are successful. So the yellow belt training will teach you a new set of skills, equip you to be a strong contributor to operational excellence teams, and will form a foundation for effectively changing how the work gets done and how decisions are made in your units and organizations. So now we'll hear from Pete, who will actually be one of our Greenbelt candidates about some of the potential projects that you will have an opportunity to participate in. So now I need to make sure I can find his slide. Are you, yeah, Pete's next. All right. Thanks. Do you want to control that, or do you want?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, everyone. If you don't know me, I'm Peter Calamari. I'll be one of the green belts moving forward. So we've given you a lot of information. I don't want to bog you down with a lot of detail, and we're in the early phases of identifying projects. But just to give you an overview of how we're going to move forward, Darlene Gluck and I will be the green belts in charge of the maintenance Six Sigma projects. Kenny King will be leading the custodial area, Paul Walsh in landscape, and Wayne will be managing the projects out of the medical center at District 3. So we had about 32 projects. We've met a number of times and just really brainstormed on different opportunities. This is just a small number of them. There's many more, and I think the thing we really want to stress today, this is a very open process. We really want feedback. We want ideas. We want projects to really come from the working groups. So please don't think this is just what it's going to be, or this is just a small sample. Paul had a number of projects on various aspects of his operation. Kenny has a few more. Wayne has some very interesting projects about, customer satisfaction and how maintenance rounds are really impacting that in the medical center. And there's a wide variety of topics. Is really what we're looking for is process-driven opportunities. So those are my two slides. Again, just reach out to me or any of the other green belts or anyone else who spoke today, and we'd like to incorporate your feedback and those type of projects moving forward.
Okay, so the big question is, so you took your time to come here today, but how are you going to get involved in this as we move forward? Okay, so this is for all of FOD operations staff. So if you're here today or anybody you work with, this includes everyone. In a couple of weeks, we're going to do this presentation for second and third shift. They may or may not be involved in the same projects as the folks on first shift. They may have their own. There'll be some we'll probably do together. For those of you that have been in FOD for a while, 3 or 4 years ago, we went through a process with Sally Boyles where we did a SWOT analysis for every unit. And out of that, we had some work groups. We still have some of those work groups. If you'll remember, we tackled any kind of a problem. And that was, whether it was training or process or custodial closets or how we move along, it was anything. This is a little different because Six Sigma only addresses processes. All right, and as Jim said before, we're not going to create new processes. We're looking at existing processes and how do we make them better. Okay, so it's a little bit different, but in a lot of ways it's similar. But if you're on, for instance, the maintenance technical training work group, that group is going to continue to meet because that's not a process. Now, out of that may come some things that can only be improved through process, and then we'll tackle that as a Six Sigma project. Okay, so I don't want you to be confused and think, well, that's going to go away, or that work that we did was not good. This is just a little bit different. All right, but as Jim mentioned a few times, there's going to be yellow belt training. All right, and I'm thinking of yellow belt. Think of it as gold. All right, not like banana yellow or lemon yellow, but gold. All right, any like WWE fans here? All right, I figured I had at least one in the room. Right. So think of it as one of those kind of belts. All right. But so if you want to go forward with this, the training to get your yellow belt is 12 hours, all right? It'll be delivered in 8 90-minute sessions, give or take. They start in May, they'll go through the summer, and then when those are done, then we'll start the projects. At the same time, Pete and Darlene and Kenny and Wayne, Paul, they'll be going through their green belt training. So by the end of the summer, everyone will have their training, and then we'll kick off these projects. There's a process to apply, and I think Desiree in the back of the room has a form for you to fill out. All right, it's basically asking for your, who are you, where do you work, what do you do, and then it's got some room on there for any ideas that you have already that we can add to our list that Pete talked about for project ideas. All right, and then, but as I said, at the end of the summer, once the training is done, we will roll this out. Now, there's already an email address that's set up. There are a couple of people monitoring it already. It's oe@osu.edu. So if you're here today and you don't get your question answered, or if you're watching this on video later and you have questions or you have suggestions, you can send emails to that address, and they'll get to the right person within FOD to address them. So your commitment, if you decide to move forward with this, is the 12 hours of training over the next 4 months. And those sessions will be about every 2 weeks, and they'll alternate. So if you're on vacation the third week in June, there'll be the same session the following week so you can make it up. So there'll be 2 different groups meeting on day shift, 2 different groups on night shift. As I said before, they're going to begin early May. They'll be done by the end of the summer. All right, and then the projects will launch in the fall. And as Jim mentioned, an average project takes about 6 months from start to finish. But that includes a meeting that's probably every week or sometimes every 2 weeks. The meetings will be about an hour. You'd be excused from your work time. Generally, now second and third shift, that gets a little iffy, and they're used to this. Sometimes they come in early, sometimes they stay late for those, and we make adjustments for them. And then sometimes there'll be some work outside of the meetings, whether it's you're gathering data or something to that effect, or maybe just doing a little legwork on the side so that you can contribute whatever that is when it comes to the meeting. So that's what your commitment would look like going forward. And then if you go through this yellow belt training, we'll get through the first set of projects, and then we'll sort of step back and reevaluate, and we'll decide exactly what that's going to look like moving forward. So Desiree's passing out the forms now, and we'd like you to fill those out and either leave them with either Desiree or Michelle Todman, you're here somewhere, right, before you leave, or you can drop them off to Michelle in the maintenance building, 107C, anytime over the next few days.